And I think what his real position is what he said on the campaign trail is that he would get Zelensky and Putin in a room and they'd solve it in 24 hours. That's what he thinks. Now, he's wrong and he won't solve it in 24 hours, but it won't be his fault because it's never his fault.
Can we turn our attention now to Ukraine? We've had this significant incursion by Ukrainian troops into Russian territory. They are claiming to control around 1,000 square kilometers of Russian land. Tens of thousands of people have been evacuated. Do you think, as Russia has said, that this was a crazy move?
Well, I think it's as they say. This is a crime and punishment playing out. The Russians have twice invaded Ukraine since 2014, and now they're getting a little of it back. I think it's a very significant political defeat for Russia and for Vladimir Putin. The question is whether Ukraine can sustain this position inside Russia militarily, or whether it's best advised at this point, having shown that it can penetrate Russian defenses in a very substantial way, to pull back and concentrate on the ongoing conflict inside Ukraine, so it doesn't take a victory and turn it into defeat.
Uh, Do you think, as Ukraine clearly wants, that the US and the UK should lift their restrictions in terms of the equipment that they are providing to Ukraine? Both the US and the UK have made it clear that they want any military kit that they send to be used only defensively on Ukrainian territory. Clearly, Ukraine now wants to take the fight to the Russians. Should the US and the UK give the green light to that?
Well, I think there are some end uses of the weapons we would want to control. For example, whether there'd be a use of longer range missile against Moscow. That's something we would have a stake in. But I think it's hypocritical in the extreme to say that Ukraine uh, uh, invaded with no provocation whatsoever, now is confined to fighting on its own territory. Look, in World War II, if the Nazis had crossed the Channel and invaded England, would people have insisted that they not respond against German targets on the continent? Really? You can only fight on English soil? Is there anybody in British politics who would advocate that? Uh, I think that's how the Ukrainians feel, and I'm with them.
Let me just ask you about the comments from Donald Trump on this last night when he was having a chat on Twitter with Elon Musk. Well, it doesn't sound as though whatever Donald Trump did say to Putin, Putin took much notice of that. What do you make of what your former boss has said there about President Putin, and indeed how, if he were to return to the White House, he would approach that war in Ukraine?
Well, I think he made that conversation up. I don't think it occurred in anything like the way he described it to Elon Musk. He certainly didn't have that kind of conversation with Putin during my 17 months as national security advisor, and I don't believe he had it before I showed up. It's possible he did after I left, but I don't think so. I think Donald Trump makes up facts that suit him. Sounds like a real tough guy when he talks to Putin. I think it's completely made up, and I think what his real position is what he said on the campaign trail is that he would get Zelensky and Putin in a room and they'd solve it in 24 hours. That's what he thinks. Now, he's wrong and he won't solve it in 24 hours, but it won't be his fault because it's never his fault. Therefore, it will either be Zelensky's fault or Putin's fault, and one of them will be to blame. And that's where I fear that the relationship between Putin and Trump, in Trump's mind, will work very much to Ukraine's disadvantage.
So Keir Starmer has called Iran's new president, asking for restraint after the killing of the Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. But it appears that that call has fallen on deaf ears. Iran's dismissed those pleas from Keir Starmer and others, with President Masoud Pezeshkian saying retaliation is a way to stop crime and the country's legal right. Hamas claims one Israeli hostages held in Gaza was killed last night. And this afternoon, it's thought two rockets have been fired towards Tel Aviv. Let's talk to Ambassador John Bolton, former US ambassador to the UN and a former national security advisor during the Trump administration. Good afternoon to you, John Bolton.
Glad to be with you.
Um, Thanks so much for joining us. What do you make of how Iran is responding to the calls from the British Prime Minister and others to show restraint in response to the Israeli attack on a Hamas leader in Tehran?
Well, we don't know what Iran is thinking of, but I don't think calls by any foreign leader are going to have much effect on him. I think the potential response and how strong it is, or whether they get Hezbollah to respond instead, is based more on their fear of Israel. And the kind of response this time, ignoring American pressure to take the win, as the White House said, after the last missile and drone attack on Israel only killed a few people. This time, Israel may not be so happy to take the win, and they may actually impose direct cost on Iran, not on its surrogates. So I think it's fear of the retaliation that Tehran may see that's caused this hesitancy, probably more than anything else.
What do you think that Iran will do next? We've been hearing all kinds of warnings for over a week now that retaliation is imminent. As you mentioned there, we had that drone and missile attack back in April. Should we expect something similar?
Well, I think that's entirely possible. Iran's in a very bad position. They have suffered the assassination of a key leader of one of their terrorist proxies in a secure compound in Tehran, apparently via a bomb that was put there 2 months before it was detonated. And that is a signal that the Iranian authorities cannot provide security for anyone in their own capital, up to and including the supreme leader. So unless they respond in some way that convinces their friends in other governments, their terrorist proxies, they've suffered a real humiliation. On the other hand, if they do something strong, the Israelis may respond with even greater force.
There has been the suspicion, at least, the hope that but neither Iran nor Israel actually wants an all out war, actually wants the whole region engulfed in this conflict. I mean, do you share that hope? I mean, do you think that wiser heads will prevail, or do you think that there are real risks now of a wider escalation?
Well, there is a wider war, and it's a war not of Hamas against Israel or Palestinians against Israel. It's a war of Iran against Israel, fought on five fronts: Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, who have violated centuries old British and American devotion to freedom of the seas by closing the Suez Canal Red Sea passage. Hezbollah in Lebanon, which has depopulated a 5 kilometer wide strip of northern Israel by its rocket attacks for the past 9 months. Iraqi Shia militia that have attacked American positions, military and civilian, 180 plus times since October the 7th, and Iran itself, whose conventional forces, as you say, struck Israel some months ago. That is a wider war. One front may be more active than another, but the war is on, and it's directed against Israel. And the complication for Israel is that with so many fronts to defend at once, its capabilities could be overwhelmed. And that's what's mostly on Israel's mind. Everybody talks about a wider war. There has been a wider war since October the 7th.